Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christian, and welcome to CatechesisCraft, where we talk Christianity and play Minecraft. This is the 58th installment in a series of videos designed as a teaching tool, the goal of being applicable to all audiences, regardless of how much, how little, or what fashion of faith that you, my wonderful viewers, might have. Today we will be discussing the life, the work, and the impact of Polycrates, the Bishop of Ephesus. Who was Polycrates? What do we know about his life? What does his surviving work tell us about the first few generations of Christianity? As I'm sure you can tell, we have a lot to get into, but first I'd like to reiterate the fact that this channel is not focused on Christian polemics. I'm not here to criticize you specifically, my wonderful viewers, for your type of Christianity, nor am I here to force any of you into believing exactly every single thing that I believe. I have faith that each of you watching this video is more than intelligent enough to tell the difference between objective analysis and subjective preferences, but of course, it does bear repeating. One final thing. If this or any of my previous work helps or entertains you in any way, please consider sharing this with someone who you know would benefit the most from it. Now, without further ado, let's discuss our next member of the Apostolic and Ante-Nicene Fathers, Polycrates of Ephesus. Born around AD 120 to 130, Polycrates of Ephesus is our second member of the Apostolic and Ante-Nicene Fathers to not be recognized as a saint, which puts him in the company of Maximus II of Jerusalem, who we discussed in our previous video. In both cases, the lack of sainthood seems to stem not from some major controversies in the lives of these historical figures, but rather a lack of reliable details about the lives of these people as a whole. Unlike Maximus, whose life is at least spoken of, if in minor detail, by Saint Eusebius in ecclesial history, Polycrates is an entirely absent figure from foundational texts on church history. In fact, what we do know about Polycrates only survives yet again due to fragments of a letter sent by Polycrates to Pope Saint Victor I, who we have mentioned several times previously, including our video on the apostolic lineage works of Saint Aristides. At the time of Pope Saint Victor I, there arose a controversy over the proper day to celebrate Easter. In the West, Easter was largely celebrated exclusively on the Sunday after the first full moon of the Spring Equinox. In the East, Easter was largely celebrated on the 14th day of Nisan, the Jewish day of Passover. Pope Saint Victor sought for a time to enforce a single day of celebration across the whole of the Apostolic Church, and the many bishops of the Apostolic Church argued back and forth over this topic. This is called the Quatrodeciman Controversy, which means the 14th day controversy. But what are the arguments for both sides, you ask? Well, my wonderful viewers, that is yet another great question. On the side of the Quatrodecimans, those who want to celebrate on the 14th of Nisan, Polycrates himself argues for historic precedent among the Apostolic Church, particularly among Eastern bishops. Polycrates writes of a multitude of bishops in the East who have kept this tradition, including Saint Philip the Apostle, Saint Polycarp of Smyrna, and his own predecessor, Saint John of Patmos, the Apostle, the Gospel author, the author of 3 epistles in the New Testament, and of course, the Book of Revelation, who was once the Bishop of Ephesus, and the teacher of both Saints Polycarp of Smyrna and Ignatius of Antioch, whose works we have discussed previously in our ongoing series. Quote, "As for us then, we scrupulously observe the exact day, neither adding nor taking away. For in Asia great luminaries have gone to their rest, who shall rise on the day of the coming of the Lord, when he cometh with glory from heaven, and shall rise again all the saints. I speak of Philip, one of the 12 apostles, who is laid to rest at Hierapolis. John, moreover, who reclined on the Lord's bosom, and who became a priest wearing the mitre, and a witness and a teacher, he rests at Ephesus. Then there is Polycarp, both bishop and martyr at Smyrna. These all kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month, in accordance with the gospel, without ever deviating from it, but keeping to the rule of faith." Now, in each of these cases, Polycrates argues that this is in keeping with the first apostles themselves to have celebrated the day of Passover, rather than exclusively on Sundays. But before we jump the gun, let us first hear the arguments for celebrating Easter on the Sunday after the first full moon of the Spring Equinox. Firstly, we call the day that Jesus was crucified Good Friday because we know it was the day before the Sabbath, which has always been Saturday. We know that the Passover meal was eaten Friday night because the Jewish calendar from the time of Moses up to the modern day is a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. This is why Sabbath rules apply from sundown on Friday, when the moon first shows in the sky, to sundown on Saturday, when the moon once again shows in the sky, rather than from midnight to midnight. We can see this in the book of Exodus and several other places in the Torah where God explicitly commands this as part of the Old Covenant. Quote, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, 'This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." Now that is a wealth of detail, but to summarize this, on the 10th day of Nisan, every Jewish household must take a spotless lamb, which is a male and 1 year old, and keep it in their house and live with them for 3 days. On the 14th, the 4th day, they will kill these lambs at twilight, which is sundown, place its blood on the doorposts and lintels, roast the lamb, and eat it with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. The argument being made was that because Jesus instituted the sacrament of communion after sunset on Thursday, or Maundy Thursday as we remember it, which would have been considered part of the 14th of Nisan in the Jewish calendar because it was after sunset, Easter should be on the 14th of Nisan, no matter what day that actually lands on. But to the point being made, Christ was not resurrected on the 14th of Nisan, a Friday, but rather died on that day. This would seem to point to Scripture as proof that Easter, which celebrates the resurrection of Christ, not his death, on Sunday. Furthermore, the Gospel of John details that Christ had to be removed from the cross and entombed on the same day that he was crucified before sundown, because the Jewish leaders were prohibited from working on the Sabbath, which was a high Sabbath and would have been that evening. Quote, "Since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they may be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other one who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs." Alright, why does this detail matter? Christ was laid to rest and was entombed for the whole of the Sabbath, which commemorates the day that God rested after creation. All throughout the Old Testament, we see the difficulties that the Israelites have with keeping the Sabbath day, the Sabbath year, and of course the Jubilee year, which we have discussed. In dying on Friday, lying in a tomb for all of Saturday, and rising on Sunday, God takes fulfillment of the Sabbath upon himself so that it may be perfected and completed. With Jesus, God himself in the flesh, rising on Sunday, the first day of the week, it also calls us to remember the story of the first children, Cain and Abel. Why would that be? Well, Cain was a farmer, most likely working the fields with his own father, Adam, who was cursed to struggle against the earth to grow food as part of the punishment of the first sin. When Cain sacrificed to God, he gave what was convenient for him to give at the time. But Abel, his younger brother, the shepherd, always offered the first and the best of his flock as sacrifice to God, not whatever happened to be convenient. Quote, "Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock, and of the fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must rule over it." So what God is telling Cain is rather simple. Giving what is convenient to give at the time will eventually lead you to only give your very worst, or that which you don't really care about anyway. Rather, give your best, give your very first offering, and God will shine his favor upon you. This argument, in one form or another, would propel those in favor of celebrating Easter on the Sunday after the first full moon of the Spring Equinox, rather than on the 14th of Nisan. Well, if that's the case, why did Polycrates state that the apostles of the Eastern Church celebrated on the 14th of Nisan? Again, another great question, my wonderful viewers, which I believe can be answered relatively easily. So, the last of the apostles to die, St. John of Patmos, whose influence was great over the many bodies of the Apostolic Church that made up the Quatrodecimans, would die sometime between AD 90 and 110, a time under which the Second Temple had yet to be destroyed in the razing of Jerusalem. Even St. Paul is recorded as having gone to the temple many times during his life, both before and after his conversion. But again, the temple was destroyed in AD 130 during the siege of Jerusalem by Emperor Hadrian. If the temple no longer stands, the temple worship, and therefore the feast days of the Old Covenant, can no longer be celebrated in their traditional fashion. Jesus himself prophesies this is going to happen, as recorded by the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Quote, "And while some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, As for these things that you see, the days will come where there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he said, See that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once." If then Christ himself fulfills the Old Covenant through the perfection of the Sabbath day, invites us to give our first and our best by his resurrection on the first day of the week, and specifically prophesies that the temple will be destroyed and God will be worshipped by all, not only the Jews. And also, if St. John of Patmos, the last apostle, died before the destruction of the Second Temple, it makes sense why he would have commanded celebration of the 14th of Nisan, but the Apostolic Church in the West would celebrate it on Sunday after the first full moon of the Spring Equinox. Both of them are celebrating the same event, focused on the same theological points, but coming to very different conclusions. If we return to Polycrates, we will see that he never relies upon his own understanding, but points further to his predecessors, including 7 of his relatives, all of whom were bishops before him. For those of you out there interested in the arguments for and against priestly celibacy and the Western and Eastern Church arguments, Polycrates certainly falls on the Eastern side, even stating that St. Philip the Apostle had 2 daughters, which is definitely a discussion for another day. In calling upon these figures, and all of his relatives before him, he relays what they told him in regards to celebrating Easter. Quote, Moreover, I also, Polycrates, who am the least of you all, in accordance with the tradition of my relatives, some of whom I have succeeded. 7 of my relatives were bishops, and I am the 8th, and my relatives always observed the day when the people put away the leaven. I myself, brethren, I say, who am 65 years old in the Lord, and have fallen in with the brethren in all parts of the world, and have read through all holy scriptures, am not frightened at the things which they said to terrify us. For those who are greater than I have said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Now, more than anything, Polycrates simply wants to relay that he does not wish to cause a schism, but simply obey the law of God to the very best of his ability. In his last words, he relays that there are a large number of bishops in the East who also believe that it is important to celebrate on the 14th of Nisan, and simply do not wish to be restricted from doing so. Quote, I might also have made mention of the bishops associated with me, whom it was your own desire to have called together by me, and I called them together, whose names, if I were to write them down, would amount to a great number. These bishops, on coming to see me, unworthy as I am, signified their united approval of the letter, knowing that I wore these gray hairs not in vain, but have always regulated my conduct in obedience to the Lord Jesus. While many of you, my wonderful viewers, might wonder why I chose to take such a small set of fragments and turn them into a video, all of this is ultimately in an effort to explain 2 things: the seat of St. Peter, and how to interpret tradition. As these fragments, alongside the letters of other figures from the time like St. Irenaeus, tell us is this: if the Bishop of Rome wanted to enforce a universal standard, even as early as the 2nd century, these things were considered authoritative across the whole of the Apostolic Church. And if it were not within the authority of Rome to do so, for what purpose would these letters have even been constructed, sent back and forth, and deliberated over in the first place? Why would Polycrates have assembled a veritable synod of bishops who supported his letter to Rome, if Rome was not seen as the governing authority across the Apostolic Church at the time? In any case, Pope St. Victor I would end up not enforcing a universal standard for the celebration of Easter. That would come during the First Council of Nicaea in AD 325, which you can learn more about in a previous video on our channel, where the date would be officially set at the Sunday after the first full moon of the Spring Equinox, according to the Julian calendar. Now, for centuries, the whole of the Church would celebrate on the same day, the day that Pope St. Victor, the successor of St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles, had wished to celebrate originally, but this would not last forever. During the days of Pope Gregory XIII, the problems of the Julian calendar reached a bit of a crescendo, where the Spring Equinox, which should take place between the 20th and the 21st of March, was off by an entire 10 days. Correcting and replacing the Julian calendar with the Gregorian calendar in AD 1582, Pope Gregory XIII had officially declared the new calendar as universal in a papal bull, which, at this time, the Orthodox tradition had generally ignored, preferring to celebrate liturgically based on the Julian calendar, even if using the Gregorian calendar was more common in day-to-day life. Though some members of the Orthodox traditions today celebrate in the Western fashion, it remains uncommon among the whole. The more things change, the more they stay the same. This video is not sponsored by anyone, but please support my friends over at Via Tradition. They are producing simple, stylish Catholic designs for a wide variety of clothing, accessories, daily use items, and home goods. I myself am a big fan of the Gregorian chant prints, and I can always use another notebook in the home. Please head on over to www.via-tradition.printful.me and pick up your favorites today. No matter what denomination or lack thereof that you ascribe to, I hope this has been educational and has given you, my wonderful viewers, a primer on Polycrates, the Bishop of Ephesus, on the Quatrodeciman Controversy, and on the authority of the Bishop of Rome, even as early as the 2nd century. As always, I highly suggest that if you are interested in a deeper understanding of a specific denomination's doctrine, the best place to go will always be an actual pastor, priest, or well-lettered theologian in that tradition. I am merely a layman, doing the very best that I can with the gifts that God has given me, and hopefully illuminating the path along the way for all of you. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, if you have found it informative or educational in any way, please consider leaving a like, comment what you gained most from it, and of course, please share this or any of my previous work with those who you believe would benefit the most from it. If you're interested in more videos like this, good news! Next week we continue our series on the Apostolic and Ante-Nicene Fathers with more content well on its way, so please make sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications for future releases. This has been the 58th installment in what I pray will be a long and fruitful series taking biblical topics and concepts large and small and forming them into simple, digestible bites with some amount of gameplay in the back because, let's face it, it's nice to have something on screen while you're learning. Please leave a comment if you would like a certain topic to be covered, as I do read as many comments as I can on these videos, and it's always good to know what my audience wants to see. If you would like the opportunity for your questions to be read out in a video, please send your Q&A questions to our email, CatechesisCraft@gmail.com. I will occasionally be posting Q&A videos where I answer directly the questions that you guys have about Christianity. Now, there's nothing off the table, but I cannot necessarily guarantee that every single question will be answered in every single one of the Q&A videos. Even still, my goal is to make this an open resource of simple, straightforward, and clear answers that accurately represent the beliefs of Christians across time. If you would like to pick up a Bible for yourself, which, as I'm sure you can tell, is pretty central to our work here, please consider checking out our video on Bible translations and using the links below that video for your choice. Each product linked in the description utilizes Amazon affiliate links, and every purchase using these links costs absolutely nothing extra for you, but provides us here at CatechesisCraft with a small percentage to help fund our work. You can also become a supporter on Locals for just $10 a month and get access to supplementary articles, blog posts, and at some point, live streams and access to a Minecraft server, both of which are coming soon in the biblical sense. But all of that is completely optional. I'm excited to be on this journey with all of you, and I'm extremely thankful for the fact that you chose to watch this video. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, whenever you happen to be watching this. God bless, and I'll see you all next time.